Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the programme under the African Union Smart Safety Surveillance programme. We're doing capacity strengthening training. We are now entering Module 5, Session 1 today, where we'll be talking about the role of national pharmacovigilance committees, and I'll be joined by Claire Davies, who's a senior scientific assessor at the MHRA's Benefit Risk Assessment team and is the agency's lead assessor on our national PV committee. Next slide, please. So, as usual, we are joined and everyone is welcome from across the African Union. A number of colleagues from different organisations, primarily from the 4 countries that are active in the AU3S programme at this stage, and that is Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa and Ethiopia. As this is session 1 of a new module, module 5, I'll just repeat some of the information that you may have heard in previous modules. Just a little bit about the MHRA. We're the National Medicines and Medical Devices Regulator in the UK, and our role is to make sure that these healthcare products work and are acceptably safe for our public. Our core activities are the usual regulatory activities of licensing products, inspecting the manufacturers, and enforcing any issues of non-compliance, and of course pharmacovigilance, which is what this whole program is about. We are a executive agency of the Department of Health and Social Care. In the UK, we report to the Health Minister. We have an organisation of around 1,200 people, primarily based at our head office in London, although, of course, for the past 14 months, we've all been working from home. But one day, when we go back, we'll be back in Canary Wharf in the heart of London. Next slide, please. Our vision is that we protect and improve the health of millions of people every day through these practices of regulating medicines and medical devices. And when we say the health of millions of people, our primary focus is, of course, like all national regulators, our own citizens, but we recognise that we can do that best by working collaboratively internationally with organisations like the regulators of the 4 countries I've mentioned and AUDA NEPAD, to strengthen capacity in medicines regulation globally. I think when we look at COVID vaccines as an example, we will not be safe until everyone is vaccinated. So regulators work together on issues like this to make sure we're sharing good practice, sharing information around safety so that we can all learn from each other. So part of the MHRA's vision is to work internationally with other organisations so that we can help protect globally, and that feeds back to the UK, of course. Next slide, please. So here we are, Module 5 in the series of this training package. This is the last module. So we'll focus today on national safety committees, and then if you look on the next slide, we'll see that next week on the 24th, there'll be another session around joint committees, and that will conclude the training package that we've been bringing together for the AU3S programme. As always, these sessions are being recorded, and we encourage you to share the links with colleagues. As always, we're using Zoom, and if you're not familiar with the functionality, there is a Q&A box, and we would ask you to use the question and answer facility to pose any questions to myself and Claire, and we'll pick those up at the end of Claire's presentation. We ask you not to use the chat function for questions, as we can't respond to questions in the chat box. Next slide, please. So Claire, over to you and talk us through the role of national committees, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm having a problem with the connection. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
It's a bit breaking up, Claire, but persevere and we'll see how we go. I think the more you use it, the clearer it gets.
Okay, I'll go ahead then. So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Claire Davies. I'm a pharmacovigilance and benefit risk assessor in MHRA, in the UK national regulator. I've been an assessor here for 20-something years now, so quite a lot of experience in this area. And I'm also the lead for the Pharmacovigilance Safety Committee at the UK MHRA, which is why I have been asked to provide this talk to you today. So hopefully I will be able to give you some useful information about my experience of national committees over the last 10 years that I've been head of this committee. So today I just wanted to take you through, I guess the most important question of all is, you know, if you're going to spend a lot of time investing and organising and completing a national committee, then why are we doing this? Why do we need independent expert advice as a regulator? And then I'm going to hopefully illustrate some of this through the UK experience of safety committees. And by doing this, I'll tell you about the functions of our safety committee, how it's structured and organised, the types of business and the issues that we take to them for expert advice in our routine work, some practical aspects as well about how we identify and recruit experts, the governance, including code of practice and confidentiality agreements, some of the committee documents, so assessment reports, minutes, the practical kind of side of things of organising a committee, and also importantly, transparency as well in terms of confidence in our committee. Next slide, please. So why do we need independent expert advice? So essentially, expert advice underpins robust evidence-based decision making. It's really important that it's independent and impartial. I'm sure in the UK, as in I'm sure many other countries, there's quite a lot of public cynicism and distrust of government and government departments such as the medicines and vaccines public health programs, as well as the regulators involved. And so it's really, really important that we're able to demonstrate that any expert advice that we're giving on the use of medicines and vaccines are independent and impartial, and that there is no kind of hidden government agenda amongst any of the advice that we're giving. And as part of this, there's important for documented and transparent procedures to be in place to ensure that there's no false accusations of hiding things or anything corrupt in what we're doing. So hopefully, if we meet all these requirements, then we have public trust in regulatory decisions, which in turn underpins public trust in the medicines and the vaccinations that we regulate. And then, of course, public trust in the public health programs, which the medicines and vaccines are used in. And I'm sure you're all aware at the moment, as everywhere in the world, this is no more important than now with the current COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So the main expert committee in the UK who advises the MHRA and ministers on medicines and vaccines is called the Commission on Human Medicines, or the CHM. This provides independent expert advice to UK ministers. UK ministers are the licensing authority in the UK. And the CHM is very importantly embedded in UK legislation. It's established under Part 2, Regulation 9 of the UK Medicines Regulations of 2012. And within these regulations, it clearly states that MHRA is obliged by statute to take advice from the CHM before taking decisions to refuse, suspend, compulsorily vary or revoke certain marketing authorisations. So we have no choice but to have a Commission on Human Medicines, and it shall be called the Commission on Human Medicines according to the legislation. I'm not going to go into more detail about the legislation, but for anybody who'd like to see the exact wording of how the committee is established in our legislation, I've provided the link at the bottom of this slide, which I believe will be made available to you after this session today. Next slide, please. So what does the committee do? So as well as being established within the legislation, the regulations also define what the committee does. And these are defined in Regulation 10. And these are to advise on the safety, quality and efficacy of medicines, to promote collection and investigation of adverse drug reactions, to consider applications that lead to regulatory action, to consider representations made by an applicant or marketing authorisation holder. And this last point here actually refers to rights of appeal that applicants or marketing authorisation holders have if we turn down, for example, an application for a licence to market a medicine. Next slide, please. The CHM, in terms of its structure and organisation, it currently has 17 members, including the chair. It's made up of a multidisciplinary team of experts, and these include those in medical fields, pharmaceutical, drug delivery, drug development, non-clinical toxicology experts, as well as statistical and methodological experts. We also have 2 lay members on our committee at the moment. All of these people are highly skilled professionals. They're senior, they're well regarded in their field by the relevant professional bodies and peers. It's important as well to note at this stage that these are not employees of the regulator. These are people who have other jobs, other full-time jobs, and who are appointed to the committee as another part of their wider role. So just as an example of the highly skilled professionals that we recruit to our committees, the current chair of the CHM is Professor Sir Munir Pir Mohammed. He was knighted in 2016 for the Queen's Speech for his services to medicine. He is currently the chair of the Commission on Human Medicines, and he's also the chair at the moment of the CHM COVID-19 Vaccines Benefit Risk Working Group. He, by training, is a clinical pharmacologist and geneticist. He also works part-time as a consultant physician in one of the hospitals in Northern England. And his specialist areas of research include drug safety sciences and personalised medicine. Next slide, please. So continue with the structure and organisation of the CHM. The committee meets 11 times a year, and each time it meets, it can be a 1 or 2 day meetings. This year has been a particularly busy year so far and have always been 2-day meetings, and it's been quite difficult to actually condense all the business onto 2 days, and occasionally there has been talk of a need for 3-day meetings, but luckily so far that hasn't happened. As well as the 11 times a year that are stipulated in the kind of the contract for committee members, there is also a requirement for committee members to join exceptional meetings as and when they're needed. And we've had a few exceptional meetings this year with the COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. Just purely because we haven't been able to wait till the next committee meeting for the advice. We've had to call a meeting in between the scheduled meetings. So the Commission on Human Medicines itself, if you remember the functions, it advises on the safety, quality and efficacy of medicines. So you'll note that this isn't a purely safety committee. It's not a pharmacovigilance committee. It's a licensing committee. In fact, it advises ministers on everything to do with human medicines and vaccines in terms of the regulatory safety, quality and efficacy. It is, however, it's realised, as I'm sure people who try to convene a committee will know, that it's very difficult to put together a committee like this, that every member of it would be able to advise on every single drug, every single topic, every single issue that potentially might arise in the lifetime of the committee. This is just purely impossible. So we accept that we won't have all of the expertise all of the time, and by doing that we also have the regulations allow for the committee to appoint expert advisory groups. These are subcommittees, and these are committees which specialise in certain areas, and therefore they allow for recruitment of more specialised and specialist experts. So CHM currently has appointed 11 standing expert advisory groups called EAGs. And as well as the standing expert advisory groups, it also can create ad hoc working groups when necessary for specific issues that arise. So an example, or a few examples of recent ad hoc working groups in the UK include the review of sodium valproate, the anti-epileptic drug, and its effects on neurodevelopmental delays and teratogenicity when it's used in pregnancy. And then, of course, the safety review with the yellow fever vaccine, and more recently and much more topically, the COVID-19 vaccines benefit risk expert working group. The committee is accountable at all times to ministers, UK government ministers, and every year there is a performance report which is laid in front of the UK Parliament each year. Next slide, please. So coming back to the CHM Expert Advisory Group, so these are subcommittees of the main Commission on Human Medicines, and the committee itself, the Commission itself decided where it needed its specialist expert advice, and this is the list of subcommittees or EAGs that it came up with. So you can see that these cover pretty much all aspects of medicine in terms of cardiovascular, diabetes, renal. There's also one on chemistry, pharmacy and standards. So this one is much more about quality of medicines and vaccines, clinical trials, biologicals and vaccines, all the way through medicines for women's health, psychiatry, oncology. There's a specific group for medicines for children. And there's also at the bottom, you'll see the Pharmacovigilance Expert Advisory Group, which is the Safety Committee. And this is the group that I really want to explain in a bit more detail to you today. Next slide, please. So the Pharmacovigilance Expert Advisory Group, our main safety committee, its terms of reference, what is it there to do? So it's there to advise the Commission on the following in relation to human medicines, and this includes includes herbal products. So the Pharmacovigilance EAG advises the CHM on the public health importance of any potential new safety signal, the confirmation and quantification of risks identified. It advises on appropriate risk minimisation measures, including commenting on communications, and not just content of communications, but how and who and when. It also advises the Commission on the design and progress of pharmacovigilance plans, such as risk management planning, which I think some of you may have heard about in other sessions and modules of this training. It also advises the CHM on current and future innovative methodologies for pharmacovigilance as well. Next slide, please. So as well as the general business, it also has an important role in advising CHM and also the MHRA on the strategic direction of the Yellow Card Scheme. And for those of you who might not be aware, the Yellow Card Scheme is the UK's national spontaneous adverse drug reaction reporting scheme. It also provides advice to the MHRA on public applications for access to yellow card data. So MHRA allows people to apply to access to data for research purposes, and we will, on submission of application and on a study protocol, will release data for research purposes on the advice of our pharmacovigilance expert advisory group. Just a quick note, the current chair of our pharmacovigilance expert advisory group is Professor Jamie Coleman. In terms of his experience, he is again a professor of clinical pharmacology and medical education in central England. He's also a consultant physician and a medical director of a big medical trust in the central England region. He's also director of the Yellow Card Centre in West Midlands, which is a regional centre of our main Yellow Card scheme. Next slide, please. So the structure and organisation of our safety committee, it currently has 14 members, including the chairman. The current expertise includes, we have 2 general practitioners. The vast majority of the other members are all based in hospital medicine. We also have 2 pharmacists, 2 lay members who represent members of the public. All of our members, apart from our lay members and pharmacists, are clinical pharmacologists. And we also have a paediatric clinical pharmacologist on the group as well. We have a consultant who specialises in toxicology and poisoning. We also have about half of the committee who are experts as well in pharmacoepidemiology. And we have 1 or 2 members who are also interested in innovative medicines, pharmacogenetics and pharmacogenomics. And of course, as with any safety committee, most of these people have a background and research in adverse drug reactions and medicine safety in general. As well as the standing committee members, we can also appoint members and experts for the day if there is a specific agenda item, for example, for which we don't have current expertise on the committee. And I'll go into a bit more detail about how we do that a bit later on. Next slide, please. So what type of business does our safety committee look at? So the group meets monthly, every month. It's one of the most frequently, of the 11 subcommittees, it meets more frequently than any of the other groups. Most of the other groups meet quarterly, but the safety committee meets monthly. It provides advice to the CHM on our assessments at MHRA, the regulatory assessments of new safety signals, benefit risk assessments, risk management plans, past protocols and reports, so post-authorization safety studies. It also provides advice on reclassifications. Reclassifications in the UK, this means that a change of legal status. So some medicines are only available with a prescription from a doctor, others you can walk into a pharmacy and buy without a prescription, and some you can just buy in supermarkets without the supervision of a pharmacist. And so with any switch between these different statuses, all of these will go to the safety committee for advice before we make a decision on whether or not the medicine can be reclassified to a different category. As well as this, the P provides really useful and really sound expert advice on any draft risk communications that we have. It also considers and reviews monthly reporting statistics for the yellow card scheme. So as well as the CHM, the Pharmacovigilance EAG has responsibility for seeing all of the data that comes to MHRA through the yellow card scheme every month. And then as within its remit and as according to the legislation, the PEAG advice is taken forward to the Commission for the final decision. Next slide, please. So when do you need to seek expert advice? I mean, there's a lot of pharmacovigilance assessments that don't get taken to a committee for advice. But how do we decide what needs expert advice and what is fine to action without advice? So these are the rules that we use at MHRA to decide which topics, which issues need expert advice. So we take assessments to committee if the outcome of the assessment suggests that there's going to be a significant change in the benefit risk balance of an individual product or indeed a class of products, and if we are thinking about taking regulatory action. And that regulatory action might include full suspension or revocation of the marketing authorization, or if there are other restrictions on the use of a product being considered. And these kind of restrictions include things like restricting an indication or adding a contraindication to use. I mentioned legal status reclassifications before, and also potentially changes to the dose or duration of treatment. So any kind of risk minimisation measure that has a clinical impact. We also take issues to committee if the benefit risk product is finally, benefit risk of a product is finally balanced based on the data that we've assessed, or if the data are equivocal. So equivocal meaning can be interpreted many different ways. Next slide, please. We also take issues to committees if any of the risk minimisation or actions that we're proposing are likely to impact on public health policies or clinical practice. And by this I mean things like if we introduce new liver function monitoring tests, for example, or renal function monitoring tests. This is going to have an impact on resources and clinical practice. And so in these cases, we would always seek expert advice, just so that we know that we are justified in expecting doctors to take extra time and extra resource and money and all that those requirements are in the health service, to make sure that these are justified and we're not overstepping the requirements in any way. Also, in terms of impact on public health policy, then this is no more important than when we're considering vaccination policies. So if we are suggesting that there needs to be a contraindication to a vaccination, this will obviously have a significant impact on the rollout of any vaccination programme. So all these are things that we would always seek expert advice on. So other things to consider in a slightly different vein are if we're considering an issue that would be the first of a kind. So are we setting an important precedent? Is this the first product to be reclassified from a prescription only to a pharmacy only product, for example? Or if the issue or assessment concerns any novel therapy, technology, approaches or methodologies, it's always a very good idea to have expert advice in these areas for new kind of anything really, because as you know, the regulator, even the experts within the agency, these are all new and novel to everybody. So it's a very good idea to have the best expertise in these areas that you can. Next slide, please. So as well as what I've just discussed, so we would also take, for example, issues to committee where significant public health impact is anticipated. And it might not necessarily be that this is a particularly serious side effect or issue that we're dealing with, but it might be that the medicine or is a vaccine that is used in an awful lot of people. So although it basically will impact on a lot of people's lives, basically, or if we're thinking that something is going to be restricted, then what are the alternatives and how many people are there who might be left without an alternative and so on. So For example, in the UK, these are the kind of issues where we would generally always seek expert advice purely because they are very, very widely used medicines, and they include vaccines, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, antibiotics, and hormonal contraceptives in particular as well. Another general rule that we use in the UK for deciding whether a paper or an issue should go to committee is whether whether we can anticipate a high level of public and or government ministerial interest in the issue itself. So I'm sure in the UK we have quite a lot of areas of concern historically and currently, and these are things that tend to crop up time and time again in the newspapers, in public kind of concern generally about areas of medicines. And in the UK, these include concerns or medicines that involve pregnant women or children, or side effects that specifically occur in these people, or if the products have previously generated high levels of public interest. In the UK, these are usually vaccines, use in pregnancy with sodium valproate, and contraceptives as well. And generally, I think for vaccines and contraceptives, this is because these are generally used in healthy populations. And so the benefit risk balance is slightly different. We're not treating a disease as such. Next slide, please. So those are the papers and the issues that we seek advice, but then how do we actually go about seeking advice from our experts? So prior to COVID-19, we had face-to-face committee meetings monthly. At the moment, most of the MHRA, if not all of the MHRA, are currently working from home, as are some of our experts. So face-to-face committee meetings are not possible at the moment with the current COVID-19 restrictions. So all of our meetings are done by video conference, and these we find work really, really well, especially where we have very, very busy experts who previously might have had to catch flights or travel for hours from one end of the country to the other to join a meeting and so on. Whereas now it's a couple of hours out of their day instead of a whole day of meetings, which we find we get better attendance and better commitment as well with these video conference meetings. So it might be something that we're considering having an option for even after the COVID pandemic and the restrictions are lifted. We also have the option, obviously the committee meets every month, but as we heard for the commission, there are occasionally times when we really need expert advice. We can't wait until the next committee meeting. So either we'll arrange an ad hoc meeting, or if it's something that can be done by a written procedure, we will send out our papers and seek written advice instead. And this can be done by sending the paper to the whole expert advisory group, or just selected members if it's a very specific special area of expertise needed. And we also find that ad hoc written advice can be sought from different members of different EAGs at the same time. So it's quite a good way of getting expert advice on an issue that covers quite a few different specialities as well. Next slide, please. So turning a bit more to some of the practical aspects of how we actually set up a committee, how do we identify and recruit experts to the commission? So MHRA, although it's a committee which we administrate, we don't have control over the appointments to our committee or to the main CHM in any case. So the members of the committee report to ministers. They're accountable to the Minister for Health in the UK. And therefore it's the UK government which is responsible for recruiting the experts to the CHM. And it's the UK government who the Cabinet Office puts out a public advertisement with invitation for applications. So the applications are then processed by the UK government, the Department of Health and Social Care. Shortlisted candidates are then interviewed by a panel which includes some quite heavy sort of esteemed people in their fields. Includes the MHRA chairman, the CEO, and also the CHM chairman. Appointable candidates are then recommended by the panel to minister, and the minister is the person who makes the decision on who is appointed to the committee. And through all aspects of their work, commissioners, once appointed, are accountable to ministers. So the appointment terms are for a term of up to 4 years, and any member may be reappointed for up to 10 years, but it's a maximum term of 10 years that any one person can serve on a committee. Next slide, please. So for those who are interested in the more practical aspects of how the committees, how we advertise and the wording, the the role and responsibilities, the person specifications, and the essential criteria for experts on the Commission of Human Medicines, I've included a link here at the bottom of this slide. And this is the actual advert. So we recently did a recruitment exercise for the Commission. And this is the link to that. It's the appointment exercise has now closed, and the members have been appointed to the committee. But for those who are interested in perhaps looking at how to set up a committee yourselves, how to advertise, here this is the example of the most recent recruitment exercise to our Commission on Human Medicines. Next slide, please. So the expert advisory groups have a slightly less, they're not embedded in our legislation, and the members of the expert advisory groups are not accountable to ministers. They're accountable to the Commission itself, because it's the Commission who sets up the expert advisory groups. And so recruiting experts to the subcommittees, the expert advisory groups, is slightly different. And can be done within MHRA itself. It doesn't need to be done by the government. And so recruiting to the EAGs, the vacancies are advertised by us, the regulator, on our website. And the chair and the principal assessor, and I'll come back to the principal assessor, review the applications and select suitable candidates based on their professional competencies, but also the gaps in the committee, where the types of experts that we need, where we have missing expertise. Not all of the appointments are interviewed. So this is a difference to the CHM recruitment. We only interview for eager members if candidates can't be appointed, or that we can't choose between candidates based on their written applications. Then we may interview candidates to separate them. The successful candidates are then recommended by the chair and the principal assessor to the CHM, and then the CHM will discuss and appoint if they agree with the recommendations. And again, as with the Commission on Human Medicines, their experts are appointed for a term of up to 4 years, and may be reappointed for a maximum of 10 years. Next slide, please. So remuneration, I think this is one of the written questions that we had before the session today. We do pay our commissioners and expert advisory group members. It's a small flat fee that is paid to basically reimburse them for the time that is spent for a 2-day meeting, for example, for the Commission on Human Medicines. You can imagine the number of assessment reports and the amount of work and the time that goes into reading those papers prior to the meeting. It's usually a day or so's work just to prepare for the meeting. So often members have to take days off from their day-to-day jobs, and so we feel we are justified in paying them a flat rate fee for that kind of inconvenience, if you like, for preparation required, and also their attendance at each meeting, which again is time away from their day-to-day jobs. So as just to give you an indication of the amounts that they're paid, the rates are higher for commissioners, which reflects the increased responsibility that they have, their accountability to ministers, and also the 2-day meetings as to opposed to a half-day meeting usually. So the chair of the Commission on Human Medicines, he's paid £500 a meeting, and then the commissioners themselves, the members of the committee, are paid £325 a meeting. For EAGs, that's less. The members of EAGs are paid £200 a meeting. And as well as this flat fee that they're paid, they also get paid travel and subsistence expenses for each meeting that they attend. Next slide, please. So turning to the governance of the committees then, this is a really, really important aspect of committee business. And in this, we have a code of practice which is published, it's publicly available. And so the public, anybody can look up at any time how the members and the chair and the members of our committees must conduct themselves in public office. And essentially the code of practice basically sets out rules to be followed by the chairman and members of all of our advisory committees. And this includes what they must do if they hold business or personal interests, which could lead to either not just a real, but also perceived conflict of interest in any of the issues that we discuss at the committee. And it also sets out the rules that then have to be followed if an interest is declared by a member or the chair of the committee. This in its entirety is basically there to provide reassurance to ministers and the public that their advice is impartial. And in doing so as well, all of the declarations that are made are entered into a public register, and it's available to anybody to search in the UK. So all of the interests declared are publicly available to anybody who wants to see them. Next slide, please. So in terms of the interests that have to be declared by members of the committee, so these are basically any financial interests that they have in the pharmaceutical industry. And this is particularly important for the products, the marketing authorization holders or the applicants for the products concerned under discussion, but not just the product itself that's under discussion, but for licensing discussions in particular. We also take interest in competitor companies as well, because of course it might be in the interest of a competitor company to prevent the licensing of a potential competitor. So not only do they have to declare their own financial interests, and this financial interest includes things like shares in pharmaceutical industries. They also have to declare any financial interests that their immediate families have in pharmaceutical industries. By immediate family, that means a spouse or any other person that lives, adult person that lives in their household. So as well as financial interests in pharmaceutical companies, there's this kind of catch-all interest that has to be declared as well. And this is basically any other matter that could affect their impartiality. And again, it's not just that could affect, but also could be seen to affect their impartiality. And this one is quite interesting because you might note that we have lay members on our committees. And some this could actually catch some interest for lay members as well, who won't necessarily have interest in the pharmaceutical industry, but might have personal reasons for wanting a drug to be licensed or to be taken off the market, for example. And so this is quite a good interest or a rule to have, which catches all those other interests that don't really fit into financial interests. So once the member has declared their interests, the type of interest that they declare then determines the level of access they get to the papers, as well as the level of participation that they're allowed during the meeting. And if there is any personal financial interest in the pharmaceutical industry, that member will be asked to leave the meeting for the discussion of that item. They won't be part of the discussion at all. In fact, for the Commission on Human Medicines, none of the chair nor the members can have a personal financial interest in pharmaceutical industry. It's not allowed at all. It's only allowed for expert advisory group members, and even then we try to recruit people who don't have these interests. Next slide, please. Oh, just to say on the last slide, the link at the bottom of the slide was the link to our current code of practice, if anybody's interested in that. Next slide, thanks, Tara. So the other thing in terms of governance that's really important is confidentiality. So a lot of the papers that we put in front of our committee members are not just commercially sensitive in terms of the data that's presented, but also could be could cause public scares or that kind of thing if the information is leaked in a way in which it's not managed or put into context of benefits and risks and so on. If it's not managed in a kind of a responsible, managed way, then we could see adverse effects from that. So when our members are appointed, they must sign a confidentiality agreement, which means that they agree to keep the papers and the proceedings of these meetings confidential until the MHRA regulator makes the outcome of those discussions public. If they are approached by the press for information about the PEAG or the CHM's business, then they are allowed to comment. But if they do so, then they must clearly state that it's a personal view and they're not speaking on behalf of the committee. And if they don't feel comfortable doing that, then they can refer the person to the MHRA press office. And our press office actually provides advice to committee members as well and coaching on how to respond to press queries. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend too long on committee documents. This is really following on from the types of business that we have. The kind of the format and templates for assessment reports and so on really does depend on the type of issue that's being discussed. But I just wanted to highlight with some of these examples of recent committee papers that have been to our safety committee, some of the key kind of points which helps for future and also audit purposes, which is important with these kind of decision-making meetings. So you'll note that all of these papers have official sensitive or official sensitive commercial at the top. These are official government requirements for government documents in the UK, that they all must have a security level clearly marked on them. So these are what our committee papers are. They're official sensitive commercial, and they're not for publication, which is what the next line down says. The tag along the top right of the paper basically is an indication for audit purposes of the meeting at which this issue is discussed. So you can see straight away from this that it was discussed by the Pharmacovigilance Expert Advisory Group in 2019 at its second meeting in 2019. And just to say that standardization of the assessment reports and having templates like this really helps committee members know what it is they're looking at. So the type of paper for all of these is for advice. So the other categories that we have is for information. So they know the level of effort to put into reading and you know, really detailed review of the data that are in these papers. Then they don't somehow waste their time by accidentally mistaking a for information paper as a for advice paper. It also really helps to have a standard formatting so that members over time get used to finding information quickly within assessment reports. So, for example, our pharmacoepidemiology experts, for example, might skip over some of the clinical sections and head straight for the kind of statistics and epidemiology sections, because they know where they are in the papers with the standardized formats. And the kind of official sensitive, the document tags that are on these are also reflected in the minutes of the meeting as well. So it's the same thing, same headings you'll see. So they're instantly recognizable as committee documents by both staff of the agency, committee members, but also I hope as well in retrospect. So in 10 years' time, if an issue was to ever arise with the yellow fever vaccine or the Zostavax vaccine, which is, you know, the subjects of these papers on screen, we can quite clearly audit trail and understand why you know, the advice or a regulatory action was taken at that time and the data underpinning that action at that time, and we can justify that to anybody who asks us, or yeah, anybody who asks us, basically. Thank you. Next slide, please. So moving on to the minutes and public minutes then, for any meeting, as you know, minutes are important records of the discussion, and no less so than for committee meetings. These are not just for current, they're for posterity, as I say. They give a really good audit trail of why a decision or why an action was taken and the data on which it was based. Pharmacovigilance safety is ever evolving, data changes all the time, and decisions and regulatory action may have to change as well as more data becomes available. And it's really important to have a trail like this of the data that was available when, and the decisions that were made when, and the data on which those decisions were made. Quite often regulatory agencies are accused of not acting soon enough, or, you know, could you have done this earlier? All these kinds of things. And with these kind of minutes and record keeping, you can justify why you did or didn't do something retrospectively. And it's really, really important that we can do that. So the minutes provide a formal record of discussion, and so that the decision-making process, importantly, and the rationale for the advice are given, and they're clear for future reference. The minutes themselves are for internal use at MHRA, and they're strictly confidential. They include the detail of all of the discussion. We have something in the UK called the Freedom of Information Act, which means that any member of the public or anybody can ask any government body for any document that it holds, and we have to release it unless there is you know, one of a handful of reasons why we can't release it. So minutes of our meetings can be released under the Freedom of Information Act if somebody requests it, but we are allowed to redact commercially sensitive information from those before we release them. More routinely though, we do routinely publish a summary of the meeting. So this is basically a shortened summary version of the minutes. It's written in language that is suitable for the lay audience. We remove commercial and other sensitive information, but other than that, they are pretty complete and give good information to readers about the issues that were discussed and the decisions that were made. And if anybody is interested in seeing the public minutes from our meetings, the link at the bottom of the page will take you to the public minutes of the Safety Committee, the Pharmacovigilance Expert Advisory Group. We find that publishing the meeting summaries is actually a really good way of avoiding or very quickly answering questions about what we have done, when, and so on, because all of this is already in the public domain. So it takes time away from having to answer specific queries from members of the public or anybody indeed, if they want to know things. If we're publicly proactively publishing information, then we can never be really accused of hiding anything. Next slide, please. So again, back to some of the the practicalities. The committee meetings don't run themselves, as I'm sure you can imagine. So there's quite a lot of work that goes into not just recruitment of experts, but the committee on the day. And MHRA, the secretariat for the CHM and all of its expert advisory groups, is provided by a team at MHRA, and it's called the Expert Committee Support Team. And the role of this committee is basically very, very wide and varied support role, basically to support the smooth running of the committees. They maintain the database of members, include contact details, declaration of interests and specialisms. They are administrators for the appointments to the expert advisory groups and commission. They send out the official letters, so the decisions that the commission makes, they send these out to the marketing authorization holders or the applications. They arrange the meeting dates, they arrange all the paperwork and make these available to members to access prior to meetings. They also process members' fees and expenses, and they provide the first draft of minutes as well. And a lot more. This list really does a disservice to the expert committee support team. They do an awful lot of work, so much more behind the scenes. Next slide, please. So the principal assessors, this come up a couple of times in the talk already, in part of the recruitment to expert advisory groups. This is a role which is basically a senior member of staff within MHRA who has extensive regulatory experience and is therefore, and not just regulatory experience, but also benefit risk experience and committee experience. And basically their role is to provide advice and regulatory support to the chair, to the secretariat, and also the assessors who are writing the papers and doing the assessments of the issues prior to and during the meeting. I am the principal assessor for our safety committee, the Pharmacovigilance EAG. It's my role to get the papers together for the agenda, to ask to liaise with assessors in our teams, and kind of horizon scan for issues that are going to need expert advice and whether they can go to a scheduled meeting or whether there needs to be a special meeting. I review the papers. Sometimes have sign off of papers as well. I sign off the minutes and the summary minutes. I also have responsibility for making sure that the correct expertise is available for each meeting. So although the secretariat actually do the practicalities of inviting the experts to the meetings, they don't have the knowledge or the skills necessarily of the issues under discussion to know which experts they need to invite to the meeting. So it's the role of the principal assessors to do all this. It's really a horizon scanning role. And then the recruitment is done by the principal assessor as well. Next slide, please. So in summary, I hope that I've really demonstrated that expert advice really does underpin all aspects of MHRA work, including the safety committees and the safety work. It's firmly embedded in the UK legislation, and it's important, really important, that it's independent from the UK government and the MHRA in terms of the advice it gives. We have formal documented procedures, and these are really, really important for recruitment and handling conflicts of interest and to record proceedings. The data, the assessment, the discussion and outcomes are all documented centrally, so there's organisational memory. And more importantly as well for public confidence is transparency, and we're hopefully with all these things combined we have public confidence in regulatory decisions, the medicines and vaccines and the public health programmes. Next slide please. I think I just wanted to finish off today with this illustration of why why expert advice is really, really important in regulatory decision making in terms of public confidence. And this is a really recent example of where it's worked very, very well in the UK. So this is a newspaper article from a UK national newspaper called The Guardian. This was published on the 8th of April 2021. And this was the day after the UK government press briefing where we announced the risk of thromboembolic events and thrombocytopenia with the COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca, and the new advice that those under 30 should be offered an alternative vaccine. And the press conference was headed by Professor Jonathan Van Tam, who's the Deputy Chief Medical Officer in the UK. It's his job to oversee the public health response to the COVID-19 pandemic. That includes the vaccines, the therapeutics, as well as all the other public social lockdowns and so on. Dr. June Rain, the CEO of the MHRA, also was part of that briefing panel. Professor Wei Shen Lim, who's the chair of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. So this is a committee which is not part of MHRA, but it does advise the government on public health programmes regarding vaccination, so how vaccines should be deployed and who should receive them and when. Professor Surmanir Pur Mohammed, you'll recall, is the chair of our Commission on Human Medicine. So he's also the chair of the COVID vaccine 19 benefit risk group, and it was the CHM group that reviewed the data on the risk with this vaccine, made its recommendations on the benefit risk of the vaccine. That then was taken by the JCVI, who interpreted that in the context of the public health programme. And it was the announcement of all these together, the regulator and the government, but joined with their expert committees, the expert advisory committee chairs, which gave the public confidence. And the feedback from this public announcement has been that this hasn't impacted the uptake of the COVID vaccines in the UK. So despite quite a big potential scare story, the combination of the regulatory advice, but in the clear view of having had independent expert advice in informing those decisions, has really been a success story recently. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for listening, and any questions.
Well, Claire, thank you very much. You've given colleagues, I think, a wealth of useful information there. If they're considering how their committees run, whether they're thinking of establishing a committee, or indeed if they're thinking of being a member of a committee, I think there's a lot of useful information there. And as always, encourage colleagues on the call to share the videos once they're available, so others can access the information. There are, Claire, a couple of questions came in. One, I think it was more offering a point of view around problems with medicines regulation, is it's not selecting any key problems and putting solutions in place. I think that probably goes to risk management and risk mitigation, and the advice that committees can give in how to manage the risks that have been identified in clinical trials. So I think that's a key role for both the Commission and the Pharmacovigilance. Would that be right?
I'm really sorry, Nick, I didn't catch any of that question.
Is your internet playing up?
Yeah, it's better now, try again.
I was saying about the role of the Commission and the Expert Advisory Group, the PEAG, on risk management, planning and risk mitigation.
Yeah, so specifically about their role in that aspect of pharmacovigilance. Yeah, so they advise right from the very beginning. So they advise in the pre-licensing stage. So although it's strictly a post-authorization committee, a safety committee, it's in these new novel new products coming to market in which the safety committee gets involved. So it has a fundamental role in helping the company design their studies, their post-marketing studies in particular, in order to identify kind of any missing information, or to address, you know, to further characterize any identified risks or even potential risks that may be indications for clinical trials but haven't really been fully borne out by the limitations of clinical trial data. So yeah, very much involved in risk management planning, both in terms of just either saying, I think the other thing that maybe I didn't mention in committees is that sometimes a no is just as good as a yes. So we're not just confirming risks, but often we take things to committee to confirm the absence of risks as well, which is really important for things like vaccination programs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Claire. I think the other question that came in was just asking for more information on the role of the lay members and what role are they supposed to play in the Pharmacovigilance Expert Advisory Group. I think we have 2, is it, on PEAG still?
I don't think I got all that. I'm really sorry.
The role of the lay members on PEAG?
Oh, the lay members. Yeah, so all committee members, it's part of the application process that they are, although they might be experts in a very specialised field, that they are willing to comment on all aspects of the committee's jobs, even if they're not experts in the issue under consideration. They generally will have a view from a person point of view as a lay member, and that's really where our lay members come into it as well. It's very much the public patient view. So a lot of the advice, they do read the complex scientific papers, a lot of them. They're very interested by the complex scientific papers, and they're very interested by kind of the complexities of benefit, risk and regulation as well. We have very good lay members on our committees at the moment, but where their best, where their strengths and their real qualities are is in understanding the patient viewpoint, and also not taking for granted understanding the science and the acronyms and the medical technologies and everything, and really paring it down, particularly risk communications and balanced and managed risk communications. Our lay members are really very helpful in that respect.
Indeed. Thank you, Claire. Well, we've run over our allotted time by a few minutes, and I thank those that have managed to stay on to the end. I thank you for your attendance. We always ask that you complete a couple of short questions for our poll, and whilst those come up on the screen for you to complete, I just want to thank Claire for your expertise today and telling us all about how the committee system works. We hope colleagues have found this information useful, and we look forward to welcoming you back next Tuesday for the final session in this module, and indeed the capacity building programme. We'll leave it there, and again, thanks to everyone for your attendance, and Claire, thank you so much for your expertise today.
Thank you.